Greetings and welcome to this virtual semester-ending campus conversation. I'm Dan Mogila from the Campus Office of Communications and Public Affairs. As we all know, this has been a semester unlike any other at a time unlike any other, and therefore I'm particularly grateful that joining us today is Chancellor Carol Christ. She's going to be providing us with an update on Berkeley's response to COVID-19, as well as all of the planning efforts that are currently underway for the future. The Chancellor will also be answering questions you've already submitted, as well as those that will come in during the conversation through the UC Berkeley Facebook page. Carol, good morning, and let me just ask you to start off by setting the table. What's underway right now? What's happening on campus that you'd like people to be aware of?
Good morning, Dan. I want to begin by thanking everybody in the audience. This has been a semester, as you said, unlike any other. Unlike any other, I think, in lived experience. I've been so impressed by the resilience and creativity and dedication of the community, particularly at a time when we're all facing challenges, not just in our work lives, but in our personal lives, children home from school, trying to homeschool children, economic challenges, health challenges. So I just want to say first how grateful I am to the community. At the beginning of this process, we decided upon three principles that would guide our decision making. The first principle is to protect the health of our community. The second principle is to sustain the continuity of instruction. And the third principle is to save as many jobs as possible. So we've been guided by that in the decision making that we have engaged in relationship to the current semester. Now all of our attention is focused on the fall semester. What we are is set up in a set of task forces, each one of which is chaired by somebody on my cabinet. And let me talk a little bit about the work of those task forces. First, and probably most important, certainly prior in the decision-making, is a task force on public health and testing. It's the Public Health and Testing Advisory Group. It's of faculty who are expert in this field. Nick Jewell has agreed to chair it. Nick is a retired professor of biostatistics, now teaching in London. Luckily for us, he has gotten stuck in the United States, unable to go back to London, and has agreed to take on this task. And we couldn't have a better person to do this. We need to, that task force is talking about essentially four issues, and it will be advising me and the provost. First, we're trying to make a determination about testing and what kind of testing regimen we should have. Secondly, we are trying to determine what public health measures we should have in place, things like social distancing, wearing masks. Thirdly, we need to put in a system of contact tracing. Fourthly, we need to identify a place where we can where we can quarantine any student who tests positive for the disease, or any individual in our community that can't be isolated where they live. And finally, we need to put in place environmental surveillance and symptomatic surveillance. So once we've determined what the community should do in those regards, we'll be ready to start planning for the fall semester. Actually, before we start planning for the fall semester, we'll be planning for an increase in research activity that will start as early as June. Randy Katz is in charge of the committee about the reactivation of our research programs. And then there's a task force that's led by Steve Sutton that's about the dormitories, and it's charged with advising me and the provost about how densely we should populate our dormitories, how we can use them and yet protect the health of the students who live there and of our entire community. Other task forces that we put into place are one on instruction. I assume we'll talk a lot more about that in a bit. One on administration, one on finance, one on communication, one on athletics. I've never realized as acutely as I have during this process how communal a place the university is, how much it's based on congregation. And so what we're doing is trying to figure out in circumstances that will probably have us socially distancing for some while, how we can safely start to ramp up the university's activities.
So I'm going to ask you about the budget in just a second, but my understanding is you're also using three possible scenarios, and we don't have to go into too much detail, but I think people would benefit from having an idea of what are the likely scenarios, what are the scenarios we're looking at and measuring each of these planning efforts against.
Yes, we are working with three scenarios. The first is one in which we're fully remote, just as we are in this part of the semester. The second is one in which most of our activities are in person, but some portion of them are still remote. And the third scenario is one in which it's really a hybrid scenario in which many of our activities are still remote, but then others are in person.
And how much of this is going to be driven by the situation beyond the campus, within Berkeley, within Alameda County, the Bay Area, California? What's the interplay between the campus's planning and eventual decisions and the data and conditions around the campus?
Well, of course, the decisions that we make will be shaped by what's happening beyond the campus, what's happening with the pandemic, what state requirements are, and what the city of Berkeley's requirements are. So yes, we're certainly subject to all public health requirements, and of course, we would want to be observant of those requirements.
Let's turn to the budget now. You know, it's true, I think, for the nation and the world, not just the campus, that the impact of COVID is not just an epidemiological one or a health one, it's been also profoundly financial. What have we learned? Where are we in terms of the campus budget? What do we know and what are we forecasting?
We know that we will have a huge budgetary challenge, both at the moment and also in the fall. When I think about the budget, I like to divide COVID-19's impacts into two parts. The first are the immediate impacts of canceled activities. These are largely located in what we call our auxiliaries. That's housing and dining, Cal performances, athletics. Those are all areas of the university whose operations are supported by the revenues that they get for particular services. And all of those units have taken a huge hit. We've refunded lots of our room and board contracts as our students have left. Cal Performance has canceled the second half of its spring season. Athletics has canceled all of its spring sports after the shelter-in-place order. So all of those units have taken very, very big revenue hits. However, I think of this as like a deep V. That's and those units are going to rebound from that once the activities start up again. What's the much more serious budgetary challenge to us is what may happen with the state budget, with state support of the campus. I'm sure that people read in the newspaper that the state is expecting a $53.4 billion shortfall in its budgets for this year and next. It's not conceivable for the state to experience that kind of shortfall on the University of California not be affected. So that's something we're obviously very, very concerned about. And then the other vulnerability we have are our enrollments. We still don't know how many students will return in the fall. And we, of course, don't know what our out-of-state, particularly our out-of-state and international student populations are going to look at. So that's some of the ways in which our budget is not only fragile, it's in deficit now. We're anticipating, and so I'm going to give you a very wide range, a deficit between 170 and $400 million. So
Wow.
huge numbers.
And that, of course, begs the question. I need to put you on the spot, but people, I think, want to know, should we be braced for layoffs, furloughs, or something else in terms of the workforce on campus?
As I said before, we're trying our hardest to save jobs. However, personnel costs are the largest part of our budget. It's very hard to sustain our budget without not taking any personnel actions. But we have not had any conversation about furloughs at this point. We have a hiring freeze. I think people know about that.
So you were recently quoted in the paper as saying that you believed, it seemed what I gleaned from the article was you believed that it was all but certain we would have some level of hybridization in the fall. What exactly does that mean? What does that mean to you when you talked about that?
The hybridization means two things to me. First of all, there will be students who will be unable to come to campus, whether subject to travel restrictions or unable to get visas, or really struggling with health challenges or family challenges. So there are some students that will need to take their fall semester remotely. Then, if I assume that we're going to be under social distancing requirements in the fall, and that means that a lot of our instruction, particularly very big classes that fill their classrooms, will not be able to be in person. So even for students who are on campus, even those students will be taking some portion of their classes either remotely, or perhaps their sections will be in person, but the lectures will be delivered remotely. Or we've been talking about another kind of plan in which a portion of the class would attend each class. Say if a class met 3 times a week, a third would attend each class meeting each week, and the rest would experience the lectures remotely. So we're just beginning this process right now. We've asked all of our deans and chairs to write to us. These are due today. About what they see, given what they know about the public health circumstances, how they would ideally like to deliver their program, what mixture of remote instruction and in-person instruction is going to work best for them. And so Paul Alivisatos, the provost, and I are going to spend some time analyzing those, and then we will go back and talk to deans and chairs about what we think is possible. And this will be an iterative process over the next 4 to 6 weeks as we try to figure out how we can best create a program for our students in the fall.
So while the lack of a definitive plan at this point in time is understandable, given all of the uncertainties, both on campus and off, when do you hope, or have you set yourself a time by which the campus will have made specific detailed decisions about what the fall is going to look like?
We've set ourselves a deadline of mid-June for those decisions, and I expect by mid-June we will have made the main decisions. Although I must emphasize that this is so uncertain a situation that we have to be prepared to be flexible and to be able to change as circumstances change in regard to the pandemic.
And before we go on, I just want to remind everybody who's watching today that we're going to do our best to get to all the questions that have been submitted and that are being submitted as we talk. But if we fail to, we will be posting questions and answers to the coronavirus resource page that you can get through news.berkeley.edu. Carol, we're getting some questions now from Facebook, and it's a question we've been hearing a lot, and that is, why has there not been a reduction in tuition or a freeze in tuition or some changes in tuition in light of the fact that classes may not be delivered in the future, or at least in the short-term future, in the same way that they were in the past?
First, I would, I've gotten that question often and remind people that we're not delivering classes in person to protect the health of the community. We're responding to a pandemic. Students are able to access the courses that they're taking. They're getting grades for those courses, and they will get, obviously, the credit for those courses and be able to achieve their degree requirements.
Got it. I want to go now to some of the questions that came in from staff, and we'll sort of go through these one by one. And again, there may be some you don't have detailed information about, and as we said before, we'll be posting detailed answers onto the website. First one is about health concerns. What will the university do to provide accommodations to faculty or staff who are at higher risk of serious illness because of COVID-19? Will the university provide personal protective equipment, PPE?
If the university requires you to be on campus, the university must provide PPE. But we also expect to accommodate those individuals, whether faculty or staff, that can do their work remotely and feel that their health would be at risk if they were to come to campus.
Got it. Let's move on to testing. Are there plans afoot for the campus to offer either testing, whether you actually have the disease, or antibody testing as to whether an individual has been exposed to the virus?
We already offer testing through the IGI, the Innovative Genomics Institute, to any member of the campus community who shows symptoms or is experiencing symptoms. That's through the Tang Health Center. And so any member of the campus community can have access to that testing free of charge. We don't yet have a way of offering antibody testing, so that's not within our capabilities right now. But we do have testing for COVID-19.
Got it. Staff access. We're asked what plans are being considered for staff to be able to access the campus, and they mean in the short term here, even on a part-time basis. Lab access for research, offices to teach. Can people access their offices for personal belongings? What can you tell us about that?
We're working out really careful and detailed plans for opening up different buildings. We're asking, this is the reopening plan for research. We're asking individual research groups to submit plans that show that they can observe social distancing and appropriately protect the health of people that are returning. So it won't be that anybody flips a switch at a certain point and you can just come back onto campus. That you need to be authorized to return to campus within the context of a public health plan to protect the health of individuals.
Got it. And so now a question from the other side of the same coin about working from home. And here we're asked, will the campus encourage all staff who can continue to do their jobs from home to stay home after the shelter in place rules are lifted to support safety and distancing? Will a remote work option be available even if the campus attempts a 100% fall reopening?
I think that's been one of the great one of the great lessons of this experience is how remote work has been very successful for individuals. Of course, the question of if any employee working remotely depends on their supervisor and their supervisor's assessment of their situation. But yes, indeed, we will encourage remote work, both in the course of the pandemic and I'm sure afterwards.
Here's a question about public transportation, and this may be one where we'll need to post later to the website, but perhaps you have some information to share. And the question is as follows. Many people from the campus community take public transportation to campus and use the campus shuttle. Social distancing will be difficult in those modes of transportation for both drivers and passengers. How is this reality being addressed or acknowledged in discussions regarding students, faculty, and staff returning for classes and for work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's certainly top of mind for us. I'm not sure we have good answers yet, but we're talking about it. Of course, if you use public transportation, you should use PPE and make sure that you're, washing your hands and wearing a mask. But the social distancing is a little bit more complex, and so we're still spending a lot of time thinking about this very issue.
I'm just curious, and what's driving all these decisions? Is it just purely data? Is it science? Are you getting pressure from outside sources? What's guiding? What's at the heart of the decisions and the analysis that you're conducting?
What's at the heart of it is science. That's why the Public Health and Testing Advisory Group is our own faculty who have expertise in these areas, and so data and science are guiding our decisions together with the public health guidance that we're getting from the city of Berkeley and from the state.
Here's another question that came in, and we actually jumped over because we went right to the fall, and it's a question about the summer. What will life be like on campus during the summer? Will offices, labs, and programs begin to open, do you think, with social distancing and modified schedules?
Yes, indeed, that's what I anticipate. I anticipate that we're now thinking about the organization of reopening as being building by building. But yes, things will return very gradually and carefully to operation, even though summer sessions, as I'm sure people know, are remote, completely remote. So I don't think there'll be very many students on campus during the summer.
Got it. So now we're turning to the question of members of our staff and even perhaps students who are parents. And the questions are as follows. Loss of access to childcare and K through 12 schools has put working parents in a terrible bind. Let's take these one by one. How is this reality being taken into account during the scenario planning process?
A school and childcare are absolutely essential to anyone with a responsibility for care of children. I know this has created an incredible burden for many of our staff and faculty, and indeed students. It's certainly my hope that schools are going to and childcare will be reopened by the fall. But for now, we have encouraged managers to be understanding of the pressures that the closure of the schools and the lack of childcare has put on employees.
And we were asked here, is there a particular campus leader who has been tasked with looking at this particular issue, at least insofar as the workforce is concerned?
Yes, there's a Ben Hermelin and Eugene Whitlock together are heading an HR committee task force, and that's certainly a set of the questions that they'll have to be considering.
Now we're going to turn to questions that have come in that seem to be mostly either from or about our student population. And at the very top is the issue of housing. What do we think it's going to look like, could look like? What are the scenarios that are being considered in terms of residential dorms?
That's one of the most challenging decisions we have to make. It's hard to make that decision until we have made some decisions about public health and testing. We're trying to determine whether we can fully occupy the dormitories or whether we should have less dense occupation of the dormitories from one to a room to two to a room. We also are concerned about the sharing of bathrooms. We're concerned about dining and making sure we can protect student health and as much as we can keep from spreading the disease by the decisions that we make about the dormitories. I'm very well aware that many students live in dormitory-like situations over which the campus has no control. I'm talking about the co-ops and fraternities and sororities. I think probably the safer living situation is a situation in which students are living with a smaller group of their peers in an apartment than the much larger mixing that comes with dormitories. I should say this gets back to a little bit to what you were asking before, Dan. I think it's a really different challenge bringing people back to work gradually and in a socially distanced way who live in the community of Berkeley or the nearby cities, so essentially are not bringing the virus from other communities to our community. It's a very different challenge thinking about bringing 30,000 students back to campus from all over the world. And so we're thinking really carefully about that. Some of the things we're thinking about are bringing students back by cohorts, individual cohorts. I don't think that there's going to be a move-in day in the fall in which 30,000 students move in on one day. So we're really trying to carefully consider what's best both for public health and what's best for our mission of teaching and learning.
I have a few more questions here that came in. It looks like from parents, students, and even perhaps from some faculty, more on the financial aspect of housing. Will students continue to receive financial aid for housing?
Yes, they certainly will. I mean, if they use housing, they certainly will receive financial aid for housing.
And then
if they don't use housing, then no. But if they have rent obligations, then yes, or expenses that have to do with housing, yes, it would be part of their financial aid package.
And then a couple of questions about students who are. First of all, let me step back. What would you say to parents or students who are not planning, or normally, or if this hadn't happened, would not be thinking about moving into a dorm and are now thinking, do I sign a 1-year lease? The campus, for obvious reasons, is still uncertain about the fall, but housing is tight. What should I do? What would you tell them?
I think that's a very difficult question, and there's not one single thing I can say that I think would apply to everybody's situation. It depends so much on what a student's academic program is and whether to continue to make progress on that program, the student needs to be here on campus versus a semester that can more easily be done remotely. It depends a lot on family circumstances. So I don't think that there is a single answer that I can give to all students that would make sense, because people's situations are so different. They're so different academically, they're different in terms of their personal and family situations.
So, here's a question that sort of makes sense. I mean, very understandable given all the uncertainties, and this case has come in both through Facebook now and previously, which is asking about the possibility of deferring a semester or taking a semester off. Can students take a semester or year off if the university can't open without restrictions in the fall?
There is a process for requesting a semester off or deferring admission, and you have to use that process. But I would say that simply the fact that instruction is being delivered in a different way is probably not a very compelling reason.
Got it. Now I'm going to turn to grading, and boy, we're just roaming all over the map here, and I'm sort of struck by the extent to which you have answers about everything. I can see you've been busy. But what will the grading policy be for the summer and fall sessions? Have decisions been made about either or both?
The decisions have not been made about grading in the fall, and I'm sorry, I should be aware of what the decisions have been in the summer session about grading, but I don't know what they are.
So again, I just want to remind for the questions that we may not be able to answer, the Chancellor may not be able to answer in detail right now. If you go to our coronavirus webpage, information webpage, we'll be updating that page after this conversation in the days ahead. So here's something else. Let's talk about graduation for a second. How exactly will the class of 2020 be celebrated, and what plans do you have to recognize the achievements of the class of 2020?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I was just talking to Bob Jacobson, who's our Dean of Undergraduate Studies this morning. He's a member of the physics department. He was telling me about how physics was going to have, I think this afternoon, their virtual graduation. Many programs are trying to do something virtual to recognize their students' achievements in this culture of individual departmental graduations that we have. The students, when I made the announcement that we needed to cancel the in-person big campus ceremony that was to be this Saturday, I wrote to students asking whether they wanted a virtual ceremony on the 16th or they wanted an in-person ceremony at a later date when public health conditions would be safe for one. And they overwhelmingly said, no virtual ceremony. We want an in-person ceremony. And so we're still planning on that. It will be either this summer, toward the end of the summer, or at the end of the fall semester when we usually have our December graduation, or with the class of 2021 next May. However, the students on their own initiative started creating through the game Minecraft a replica of first it began just as the football stadium where the big graduation usually takes place, but then it became a replica of the entire campus. And they are going to hold a virtual commencement of Blockley University through Minecraft on the 16th at 2:00 in the afternoon. I'll be participating it through my avatar, and I'll also be addressing the graduates. And I've gotten any number of emails from students saying, please, could you record a message of congratulations? And of course I do record them in many different contexts.
You know, I'm pretty willing to bet that no part of that last sentence was anything you ever anticipated talking about before you became chancellor at Berkeley.
That's indeed true. Until the students started this project, I had no idea what Minecraft was. If I was asked what Minecraft was, I would say, oh, it's the art of working in a mine.
Okay, let's move on. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and a number of them are about the libraries. What are the plans for reopening the libraries and the archives? Is there any guidance that libraries will receive about how to provide access to checking out books?
That's a great question. We will be asking the library for a plan about how to make the library's materials available while protecting the health of both their staff and the patrons of the library. Libraries are, in many ways, it's very easy to imagine. There's a service, it used to be called Baker. I don't know if it still exists. It's still called Baker, where books are delivered very much the way in which you can have meals delivered, you can have books delivered. So I think it's more a question of archival materials and what the access will be to archival materials. But I find it easy to imagine a physical delivery system for books that can be checked out and won't be necessary for people to actually go to the library and get the book.
You know, I'm curious, it just occurs to me, given the depth and breadth and an incredible array and diversity of questions and concerns and challenges, are there other schools that we're consulting with? Are there other schools out there that seem to be leading the way? Or do you really think that this is one of those situations where Berkeley has to assert leadership and sort of chart its own course based on faculty expertise and input from the system?
There's an enormous amount of conversation that's going on between schools at this point. We're all facing the same challenges. So I have a call, it's now twice a week. For a while, it was 5 times a week with the other chancellors of the system. We're coordinating very closely. I also have a regular call with the presidents and chancellors of Pac-12 institutions. We don't just talk about sports, we talk about how we're planning for reopening. All the higher education associations of which we are members have been having regular calls, Zoom calls. The Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, the American Association of Universities, the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, to just name 3 that have had recent calls in the last few weeks. And we're all in touch with each other. We're all trying to help each other with and get good ideas from each other in what is an unprecedented and very challenging situation.
Let's focus for a little bit on international students. There's a few questions that have come in on that front. So first of all, we're asked, if the fall semester remains online, will classes be recorded so international students in different time zones can watch during the daytime and not have to get up in the middle of the night, as was the case for the spring semester?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's already in our guidelines that instructors are supposed to consider the different time zones in the provision of instruction. I imagine that that's going to be much better evolved in the fall semester. The faculty literally had 2 days to prepare to the switch to remote learning, but for the fall semester, we are spending the summer. One of the things we anticipate is a semester in the cloud that'll be about 50 very frequently taken and courses, gateway courses, courses that are particularly popular, and making those available remotely. And we're investing resources in trying to make the remote versions of these as good as they can possibly be. So it's not like, okay, you've got 2 days to switch to remote learning, but rather spend the summer thinking about how this course can be the most effective it can possibly be.
So that question about international students brings to mind a broader question that includes not just international students, but out-of-state students.
Mhm.
What Talk to us a little bit about some of the concerns the university has. Do we think there's going to be a drop off in enrollment because international students won't want to come or be afraid of being able to go home, or out of state students traveling? What are we looking about? What are we thinking about in terms of those two important parts of our student population?
We're certainly trying to preserve the both international and out-of-state student populations. They're really important to the diversity of Berkeley, but that's frankly one of the reasons that we're offering this semester in the cloud, that we anticipate there are students that will not be able to get to the campus because of travel restrictions or, as I said before, inability to get visas.
Got it. The question earlier, I mean, a lot of this sort of brings to mind something that's been all over the media and the press lately, which are a number of articles and conversations and op-ed pieces about the future of higher ed. And it was interesting. Just today, in New York Magazine, a guy named Scott Galloway, who's an NYU professor and a former Silicon Valley entrepreneur, basically said this is going to be the end of higher education as we know it. Thousands of universities are going to be closing. Those that survive will have partnerships with high-tech firms. Everything will be online, and the only universities will be open will be those for the 1%. And the same day or the same week, there's a piece in New Yorker magazine right across town where Corey Robin is writing that the pandemic is the time to resurrect the public university, that now more than ever, we need these institutions. What do you think about all this? And what do you think about the future of higher education in America right now?
Well, Scott Galloway, incidentally, is a Berkeley graduate. I know
Of
him.
course.
He's kind of futurist. I do not believe that his vision of the future is going to come to pass. Uh, I do think, I mean, some faculty have told me that the switch to online instruction or remote instruction is like discovering a muscle they didn't know they had. And I don't think they're going to forget that they have that muscle. So I think it's going to increase the capacities that we have as a university, both to reach more students, but also to provide better instruction for the students that we have here. We have one of our deans, David Ackerley from the College of Natural Resources, is thinking about remote instruction as a way of expanding the enrollment of classes that have been limited by room size. So I think that there are some real gains for our students and our potential, the people that potentially might be our students through these capacities. But I think what we keep hearing from students is their eagerness to get back to campus. And college, university isn't just about the content of the courses. It's about an experience that for many individuals is deeply transformational. And that comes from personal contact with faculty, personal contact with mentors, personal contact with other students. And people are hungry for that personal contact. So I don't think that the in-person instruction or the in-person university is going to go away anytime soon. Are there universities or colleges that are not going to make it through this? Yes, this is an enormous fiscal shock to colleges and universities. But are we just going to have a few behemoth blockly universities, all virtual and online, when this pandemic ends in 18 or 24 months? No, I don't think so. And I think that all our experience is that in periods of depression or recession, people go back to school. And I think that's what we're going to see. And public universities are so critical to that because public universities, unlike many private universities, have broad access for in terms of socioeconomic diversity.
Let me just check in about one thing before we go on to other questions that are coming in. You said 18 to 24 months. I assume that's based on information you've received about when we should likely expect a vaccine?
Yes, although some people say that's too optimistic. I was reading a really interesting article in the New York Times this morning about how pandemics end. And one of the theories about how pandemics end is people just get tired of them and learn to live with the threat.
Okay, more questions coming in about instruction. Regarding online learning, what about classes with large lab components? What are we thinking about? What are we planning for in that regard?
Our faculty is thinking really creatively about lab courses, and there are a number of different ideas that are under discussion right now. None of this has been decided. Some programs are thinking about how they could locate the most of their lab work in the spring semester rather than the fall semester, so rearranging things. Other departments are thinking about can we, have the amount of lab work we ask each individual student to do, so we can do the labs with social distancing. Other departments are thinking about how to use demonstrations as a substitute for some of the labs. So I think there are going to be a lot of solutions, and for all of us, what this crisis has done is shown us that we can't just be stuck in, if it isn't exactly the way it's always been, there's no way of adapting to the situation. And I've been just amazed at how creative people have been and how willing they are to question assumptions to try to develop within the circumstances the very best educational experience we can for our students.
Here's a question. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction. And this is one that I've seen in a couple of other fora, and it's about safety. Concern about how we will protect students from crimes near and on the campus, given that everybody's running around wearing face masks.
Well, crime is way down. That's one of there aren't very many silver linings to this pandemic, but I actually think that's a prejudice about people wearing face masks being in some, being of some danger, and I don't think that's an issue. I mean, we will have the same public safety programs that we've always had, and actually, I think there's less threat to public safety, certainly from crime, although certainly threats to public safety from disease.
So staying within the realm of sort of health and well-being, we have a question that came in about whether there are going to be extra resources on offer for those with mental health issues who may have been suffering more during this traumatic and stressful time?
I think that's a wonderful question. We've been giving so much attention to people's physical health in the pandemic. This makes sense, but I think that the anxiety, the depression, the just inability to cope because so much is changing. There seem to be overwhelming challenges in many people's lives. So yes, we indeed will be investing more in mental health. And we've also been creating virtual appointments in mental health for students who are obviously not on campus right now.
Here's an interesting question, and it's about whether we're prepared for the possibility that if there's an uptick of COVID cases in the fall, as some epidemiologists are predicting, that we might have to turn right around and reverse any steps we may have decided to take.
Yes, that's indeed one of the things we need to be prepared to do. Nobody knows what the course of this epidemic is going to be. And we might have, some people are predicting a real upsurge, even more serious than the first upsurge in the fall. And yes, we would have to be prepared to become fully remote again if that happens.
So we've gotten a couple of personal questions from you. They're the same ones, and I've heard them before from colleagues. And it's with the tremendous amount of stress you're managing and all these things that you've been talking about, there are a number of people who want to know how you're taking care of yourself and how can members of the campus community best support you.
Well, thank you for that question. I walk every morning in an appropriately socially distanced way in a track that's near my house. And I've been sheltering in place with my son and his wife and my two grandchildren who are, my son and his wife are homeschooling them. So I know firsthand how challenging it is to be in a household with children that have more energy than the four walls of the house can contain. And the challenges of parents who are not in any way trained to homeschool their children and have their own jobs to do, full-time jobs to do as well. I play music. I play the viola and the piano. I find that wonderful. I find all the arts things that you can see online wonderful. And I've been reading more than I usually do. So all of those things are things that keep me balanced.
So I want to pose one last question to you before we wrap up today. Just closing thoughts. I mean, I think people have often looked to you and to the Chancellor's office in general during difficult times for sort of guidance, and people are deeply vested in this university and its future. And maybe just share taking all that into account, share some of your own thoughts as you've been thinking about the future and what lies ahead.
Well, the last piece of formal literary criticism that I wrote was about dystopian novels. I got really interested about 4 years ago that there were these many novels being published within a short period of time, within a few months, by writers who didn't write science fiction, that were dystopian novels. And I thought, what in the world is motivating this? And so I read a lot of those novels and wrote about them, and they have very nightmarish visions of what the future is going to be, ones in which people turn on each other, that there is a kind of complete breakdown of civilization as we know it. And what is interesting to me as I reflect on this pandemic is that's not what I'm seeing. I mean, of course, there's lots of tragedy, lots of people's lives that have been so disrupted, so damaged, so much grieving. But you also see such extraordinary creativity and coming together. And I just have lots of faith in the human community. We were talking about the Minecraft graduation, but there's so many other examples. I mean, the people coming out at 7 o'clock in New York City on their balconies and all, making noise for the healthcare workers. I was just hearing this morning about a number of fraternities, sororities, campus organizations that came forward without being asked to help the city raise money for businesses and arts organizations in need. I see just extraordinary evidence of the warmth and resilience of the human community at a point, paradoxically, of great social isolation. And the university has been around for more than 1,000 years. I mean, not Berkeley, but universities in general. And we will be the stronger for this when this ends, I believe. And our community will be the stronger for it. So I know that things are really difficult for many people. As someone has said, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I always try to remember how very, very challenging some people's circumstances are, who have people who are sick, people who have died, have lost jobs, don't know where their next meal is coming from. But you also see extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity.
Chancellor, I want to really thank you for your time, for your leadership, for those incredibly thoughtful and important words. We'll look forward to additional communications, I know, over the summer as we make decisions and plan for the time ahead. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to be stopping campus conversations for the summer. We'll be back in the fall, but we will be continuing with Berkeley conversations as our faculty are sharing what they know and what they're learning that are relevant to the crisis. In the meantime, I hope everybody stays safe and please maintain your distance. Thank you.
Thank you.